Earthling Ed is perhaps one of the most recognizable faces in the animal rights movement. He once delivered a TED Talk titled Every Argument Against Veganism. Within it, Earthling Ed goes through every argument against veganism that he says he used to make, and he debunks them all, right? Now, because TED Talks have a time limit, Earthling Ed could not possibly go through every argument against veganism. He picked the most popular ones and he addressed those. And he did that for good reason, because if he's going to pick a few arguments to debunk, he better be debunking those that are made most commonly, right? Because these are the excuses that are made most commonly to inflict harm upon non-human animals for temporary taste pleasure. Now today, I want to do something a little different, and I'm making this video in particular. I've chosen this topic in particular because my patrons voted for it. And the topic that my patrons voted for is every argument against veganism used by leftists. And the reason I do this, right, the reason I put air quotations, is because I think that veganism is not inherently against leftist politics. The reason I call them leftists is for the simple reason that they call themselves leftists. Anyway, with that cleared up, let's begin. Okay, so the first excuse that is often presented is that veganism is against the cultures of some indigenous tribes across the world. Now, my observation has been that people who make these arguments, more often than not, are not talking about themselves. They are talking about some other group of human beings. Now, the first thing to note there is that to use the suffering of a different group of human beings for your own greed is absolutely immoral. Even if they, for some reason, are justified to consume the flesh of non-human animals, if they are justified to exploit non-human animals for some reason, hypothetically, that doesn't justify you exploiting non-human animals. That doesn't justify you eating the flesh of non-human animals. Why are you using their suffering for your greed? Now that is for when someone uses the suffering of some other group, some other indigenous people for their own greed. But what if it is a member of that indigenous tribe themselves that are saying that, no, this is part of my culture, right? Give up your imperialist tendencies, don't tell me what to do. I will continue to eat non-human animals. Is that justified? No. Now, I'm going to tell you something that most of my regular viewers already know, but bear with me, is that I am the descendant of an indigenous Northeast Indian tribe. Okay? I know my regular viewers are absolutely tired of hearing this in every single video. But trust me, I'm even more tired of saying this in every single video. But there is always someone new who's watching. Now, the second point to understand here is that India was once colonized by the British Empire, and all Indians were discriminated against by the British Empire. That includes Northeastern people, right? People like me, right? That includes Northeastern indigenous people, people like me. Now, the British Empire left, right? But Northeastern people still to this day face discrimination, not at the hands of the British, but at the hands of mainland Indians, right? Now, everybody recognizes that the discrimination that was perpetuated by the British Empire, that was wrong, right? Would anyone ever say, oh, the discrimination by those Indian people, by mainland Indians, against Northeast Indians, that's okay? Because, they're kind of oppressed themselves. They are the victims of imperialism and colonialism themselves. So they can kind of exploit other sentient individuals. No, right? But that is exactly the kind of reasoning that is being used when someone says, oh, these indigenous people, they are the victims of imperialism and colonialism and white supremacy. So they are justified to, kind of exploit non-human animals, right? It doesn't make sense. If you want a more in-depth analysis and a more in-depth debunking of this, I have made a whole video about that, and I will link that somewhere around here, so be sure to watch that. Now, the next excuse that is often given is that veganism is ableist. And just like the previous excuse, it is often used by able-bodied people, able-bodied non-vegans, to tokenize the suffering of disabled people to justify their own greed. This again is absolutely morally reprehensible. But what if it is a disabled person themselves who is saying it? Well, we just need to look at the definition of veganism. Veganism is a philosophy and a way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as is possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to non-human animals for, amongst other things, food. Right? That is the definition of veganism. And the crucial part is, as far as is possible and practicable. None of us are capable of completely boycotting all animal products in this speciesist society. Right? Animal products are everywhere. Animal products are in the seats of the buses that almost all of us are forced to sit on, right? Animal products are in the currency of certain countries, right? And those people certainly cannot avoid using the currency of the country, right? And so on. So none of us can truly abstain from using all animal products completely. But we can stop using animal products where it is not necessary. We can stop eating the flesh of non-human animals when we don't need to. If it is the case for a certain disabled person, and this case is going to be extremely, extremely rare, that they cannot survive on the plant-based food options that are available to them, right? And that they have to consume the flesh or some other products derived from the exploitation of non-human animals, but they don't consume non-human animal products for simple temporary taste pleasure, and they don't consume animal products when they don't have to, that person is still a vegan, right? So this crucial part of the definition of veganism is, well, crucial to note. And that part is what makes veganism not ableist. Okay, so the next excuse that is given is that veganism is classist. That what about poor people, right? Now, the thing to note about this argument, like the previous two arguments, is that it is also often made by people who are not poor, right? And they're just using the suffering, the very real suffering of poor people for their own greed. Again, completely morally reprehensible. But unlike the two previous cases, there's actually a very good reason for why this argument is often not made by poor people. You see, it is only the ultra-privileged who think that veganism requires privilege, because they think of things like the price of almond milk, right? They think that a Starbucks latte is a basic need. Poor people almost universally realize that if they stopped consuming the flesh and the secretions of non-human animals, it's going to cost them much less, because vegetables and beans and so on, right? They are the cheapest foods available in the market. Now, I understand that this point has more than one dimensions, right? And for that reason, I will point you to a different video that I made about this very topic, and I will link that somewhere around here. By the way, every video that I'm pointing to up here, I will also link those down in the description box, so you can check them out after having watched this video, right? Now, very closely related to this veganism is classist argument is the argument that what about all those livelihoods that are going to be lost because of veganism? What about all those slaughterhouse workers? Okay, few things. Number one, veganism is not going to happen overnight. The entire world is not going vegan tomorrow. It's going to be a gradual shift. And just as industries in the past have died out and people have switched to other jobs, the same will happen here. So no, that is not a good argument. But even if it were the case that livelihoods would be lost to liberate a certain group, how on earth are you holding on to the livelihoods rather than the liberation of a certain marginalized and oppressed group? I'll give you one example, right? And it's about the British colonization of India. You see, when India was colonized, there needed to be some British officials in India to sort of run the country, right? To sort of govern the country, to oppress the Indians and loot them, right? Like the Indians are not going to loot themselves, right? What do you think happened to the jobs of those people when India was emancipated from the British Empire? What kind of an argument would it be to say, we're not going to liberate India, we're not going to emancipate India, we're going to hold on to them? Because what's going to happen to all those British people who are currently in the business of looting India? Does that make sense to you at all? No? Didn't think so. Okay, and the next excuse that is often given is that there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, that for as long as the system of capitalism stays in place, there is no ethical consumption. So why even bother? Here's the thing, just because a system is discriminatory, it doesn't mean that you are justified to do anything you want within that system. I'm going to use the example of the British Empire. Yes, I studied this a lot. So you see, when India was colonized by the British Empire, right, individuals in Britain, right, British people individually, not contributing to or supporting the British Empire, wouldn't have ended all Indian suffering. But that doesn't mean that any British person could come from Britain all the way to India and loot any Indian they want to, punch any Indian that they want to, and say, oh, for as long as the system of the British Empire is in place, what does it matter what I do? The atrocities are still going to continue no matter what I do. Their behavior doesn't become justified by making that excuse. And similarly, the exploitation of non-human animals doesn't become justifiable just because a supposedly oppressive system is in place. I'm not commenting on whether or not capitalism is oppressive. I'm granting it for the sake of the argument that it is. And even if we grant that, the consumption of non-human animals is still not justified in a capitalist society or a socialist society or a communist society or any kind of society. Oh, by the way, this is just one of the responses that you could give to someone who makes this silly argument that since there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, I'll eat the flesh of non-human animals. I have made a whole video on this subject where I provide 4 separate responses to this silly argument. And I will link that somewhere around here, right? And also down in the description box, right? And I will put a reference number for that, right? Here, somewhere around here. So be sure to watch that video after watching this video, right? Oh, by the way, if you're finding this video to be insightful, a sub to the channel would be just amazing. It really helps out a small channel like mine out. Okay, so the next excuse against veganism is one that is exclusive to my country. So it only makes sense that you find a response to it almost exclusively in my video, right? So the excuse is that veganism is casteist. Now, what is casteist? Let me explain. Indian society is divided into different castes. Note that there is no valid grounds to divide society in this manner, right? And these different castes, right, they're not put on equal footing, right? There is a caste system where there is a moral hierarchy, where the higher up you rank on that caste system, right, the greater moral worth you have, right? And the lower you rank, well, the lower moral worth you have. So the way I like to summarize caste is that caste is not on the basis of any biological reality, but you might face discrimination on the basis of your perceived membership to a certain so-called caste, right? So people belonging to the so-called lower castes, while they are not any biologically different from the people who are so-called upper caste, right? People from the so-called lower castes might face discrimination because there is a perception that they belong to a different so-called caste. Clear? Yeah. Now, the so-called upper castes, right, they try to maintain a so-called caste purity, right? And one of the ways that they do this, right, is they consider the flesh of non-human animals impure, right? So they don't eat that because they are pure people. And the so-called lower castes well, they eat the flesh of non-human animals like almost every person in the world, right? So they're kind of impure. So they maintain this sort of pure versus impure difference in society, right? By the way, if you think that the upper caste people are all vegan, or most of them are vegan, they are not. They still consume dairy, and as almost every vegan knows, dairy causes far more exploitation than meat. A glass of milk might be more cruel than a pound of meat. Now, some so-called leftists are of the opinion that because these upper caste people, right, they have a particular liking for certain animals, right, like cows, right, that people belonging to lower castes must consume these non-human animals specifically, or just non-human animals in general, to sort of oppose this moral hierarchy imposed on by the upper castes, right? But that is absurd. If you're oppressing non-human animals to oppose some other kind of oppression, you've just created a caste system of your own, where you place non-human animals right at the very bottom. You're not opposing the moral hierarchy when you do this. You're finding your place in the hierarchy of the oppressor. And this is no way to oppose the caste system. To create a caste system of your own, to oppose a caste system, is nonsense. Now, the sort of final leftist argument or excuse against veganism that I often come across is that veganism will cause worker exploitations. Who will grow all those crops that you vegans are going to eat? Now, this is simply just not being aware of the facts. You see, to produce animal-based food, which is food produced from the exploitation of non-human animals, it takes far more crops than would be necessary if you grew crops directly to feed human beings. It takes 25 kilograms of grain to produce just 1 kilogram of beef. If you grew crops directly to feed human beings using the same resources that we use now, we could nourish an additional 3.5 billion human beings. By the way, sources are always in the description box in every single one of my videos. So if you want to check out the sources, well, have a look in the description box. So not only will you be causing far more worker exploitation in the form of the farmers who have to grow the crops to feed the non-human animals, you will also be causing far more worker exploitation in the form of all those slaughterhouse workers who suffer from various diseases because they have to look at violence every single day working in slaughterhouses. Now, some people would say that slaughterhouse workers are the victims of the animal agriculture industry. I'm not sure if I want to use that terminology, but it remains true regardless that slaughterhouse workers suffer from various diseases like perpetrator-induced traumatic stress, which is a form of PTSD. So for the people who are so against worker exploitation, well, you're causing a lot of it simply by consuming the flesh of non-human animals. And this is only on top of all the non-human animals whom you're paying to be oppressed, right? About 200 million land animals every single day, and almost 2,800 marine animals every single day, killed for the temporary taste pleasure of human beings. They, the non-human animals, are the real victims of this atrocity. Have enough respect for yourself to recognize that you are capable of reaching this very basic moral standard, that our temporary taste pleasure is not a good enough reason to impose suffering onto innocent, sentient individuals. Okay? Well, that's been it for this video. I've been Aditya Prakash, or Soytheist, and I would like to thank you for watching this video, and especially thank my patrons on Patreon who make these videos possible and who had early access to this video. And also, as said in the very beginning, they even voted for the topic of this video. If you'd like to do that too, be sure to check out my Patreon. There are other benefits as well, starting from just $1 a month. And while the website will say that it is per YouTube video, you will have the option to limiting your patronage to just twice a month, to just twice a month, or just even once a month. And I would still be incredibly grateful for your support. So if you choose the $3 membership, you won't be paying me $3 every single time I upload a video. you will be paying me $3 per month, and that's it. So be sure to check that out. It's the first link down in the description box. You can follow me on social media here, and especially on Instagram, where I share my more candid thoughts, mostly in the form of reels, which I don't post here. Links are in the description. Leave a like if you like this video. Leave a dislike if you dislike this video. Let me know in a comment what you thought of it. Did I leave out any arguments? If so, what are they? Would you like me to make a separate video for one of the arguments that I've discussed and go into it in more depth? If so, let me know. And if you aren't subscribed to the channel, well, be sure to subscribe to the channel. By the time you're watching this video, I have probably already recorded the next video. And with that, I will see you in the next one.